Okay. Excuse me. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti 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 Chaitanyam Sarvagam Sarvam Sarvabhuta Guhashayam Yat Sarva Vishayatitam Tasmai Sarva Vide Namaha. Very good. Welcome to you all, and welcome also to our many students attending this class online. We're continuing with this very profound section of Upadesha Sahasri. This is Shankara really showing his brilliance in leading us to understand the nature of Atma, the Swarupa of Atma. And he's focused on really what is the, it's the locus of the problem. The locus of the problem is the misunderstandings we have about the nature of Atma. When we think that Atma transmigrates, for example, is a huge misunderstanding. When you think that your consciousness is subject to being affected by sadness and other feelings in your mind, that's really crucial. So Shankara here really focuses on the essence of Atma to help us break out of that. On the surface, this section may appear exceedingly logical, but look at this. If our minds are full of illogic and bad logic, which they most certainly are, how do you handle the improper use of logic by our mind? So wrong logic can only be corrected by correct logic. We make conclusions. In the last class, we talked about a common conclusion. You wake up in the morning feeling dull. After a cup of coffee, you feel bright, and you can conclude. Yeah.
I wonder if you're muted. Do you know?
Why would I be muted?
It's flashing there.
Oh, the TV is muted.
Oh.
Yeah. I think you can hear me okay, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I don't think there's any problem here, but thank you. So in last week, this is a good example of our wrong logic. You wake up in the morning feeling dull. After a cup of coffee, you feel bright, and therefore you conclude Atma was dull and Atma got bright. Consciousness was dull, or awareness was dull, and that air went up from 20 watts to 100 watts, so to speak. That's bad logic. How do we deal with how do we deal with errors in our thinking like that? That's why Shankara uses some reasoning, some logic to help bring us out of that, and we're going to see that used in a particularly effective way in today's class. What am I looking for is this. Okay. We saw this verse in brief in the prior class. I'd like to, we'll begin today's class by seeing that verse once again. Vyaktasyara prakashasya, vyaktasyara prakashasya, prakashatma samagamat, prakashatma samagara. Prakashastvarkakaryasya, prakashastvarkakaryasya, iti mityavachohyataha, iti mityavachohyataha. Very good. Vyaktahisyat. An object in your mind becomes an object in your mind which is by nature a prakashasya. For that mind, we need to recall the ancient Hindu view of the mind is made of stuff. Physical body made of physical stuff. Mind made of mental stuff. We call it sukshma stuff, subtle stuff, non-physical stuff. Memories, thoughts, etc. are not physical, but you can't say they don't exist. This is another common logical problem. They have no size, weight, etc. But how could you possibly say that thoughts and feelings don't exist? They exist as non-physical realities. They exist in your mind, but they, in and of themselves, are aprakasha. They don't reveal themselves until prakashatma samagamat, until they have samagama. They are united with, connected with, associated with prakashatma, that which is by nature shining, revealing. Shankara's language here is fairly complex. The meaning, though, is not complex, and that is objects in your mind, we call them vrittis, mental objects. Those vrittis don't say, here I am. They're stuff. What makes the vrittis in your mind known to you is when they get associated with consciousness, when they're revealed by consciousness. I'm going to set that word revealed aside, a little problematic. Those thoughts in your mind are in the presence of consciousness. In the presence of consciousness, you've got two factors. You've got the vritti, the mental object, which has some form. So you have form and you have consciousness. Form, and to go back to the word we used a lot in last week's class, form plus knownness. Right? Form, given by the details of the vritti in your mind, and knownness, which is due to consciousness. You put these two together, mental form and knownness, and what you have is an experience. That's what experience is. Something in your mind that has some kind of form, some kind of detail. In the presence of consciousness, it acquires knownness. Notice it's the thought that acquires knownness. Not that knownness acquires the thought. That's a little technical. Let me set that aside. We may touch on that later. So this much we described in some detail in last week's class, and that is mental objects are known because they are in the presence of consciousness. Conversely, interesting comparison. Your thoughts have knownness. What about activities in the brain of a computer? That's an interesting contrast. We could say computers have thoughts, so to speak. They're utterly unlike your thoughts. You don't think in ones and zeros, do you? And some programmers might, I don't know. But generally, our thoughts are very, very complex. But computers, as you know, are very, in the essence of a computer, incredibly simple. It comes down to on and off. But what is so different is that the activities in the brain, in the CPU of a computer, are not known to anyone. No one is observing those thoughts. There's the absence of knownness for those activities in a CPU. Your thoughts, however, have the property of knownness. That's what he says here in the first half. Then he continues, Shankara continues, now this is our next topic. He says prakasha tu, but prakasha, light, the light of consciousness. Here, not the light of consciousness, but arkas karyaha syat. If you think that the metaphor we've been using again and again is that consciousness reveals the activities in your mind like the sun reveals activities on this planet. And we spent about half of the last class slicing and dicing that metaphor, and we discussed at some detail. In fact, this is, I think, an extremely important point. That consciousness shines is a metaphor. Don't take it as truth. We use metaphors all the time to describe things. Don't mistake a metaphor as a fact. Someone who's enlightened, sorry for bad joke, someone who's enlightened does not shine in the dark. That word, even the word enlightened, is metaphoric. There's no shining, there's no light here. We use metaphors all the time. Don't take it seriously. Do you see what I mean? Have you ever seen a meaning? Human beings, I forget, there's some famous author who said humans are metaphoric beings. Someone can find out who said that, I have no idea. Anyway, we think with metaphors. So to say that consciousness shines is a metaphor. What is not a metaphor is what you're experiencing right now, and what you're experiencing right now is whatever happens in your mind is known to you. That's it. To help us understand the knownness of what is happening in your mind, we use that metaphor, that the so-called light of consciousness reveals the activities of your mind. So this is, to summarize much of what we discussed in the last class, the defects of that metaphor. Shankara is going further. Defects of that metaphor. And just, actually there's so much here, I have to kind of, I'm trying to edit myself so that we don't get lost in the in the complexity of this topic. So here Shankara makes another observation about that metaphor. The sun shines. Therefore, prakashaha, shining or light, is arkakaryaha, is a result or effect of the sun. The sun produces light. Actually, we talked about, I'm trying to remember what we covered in our last class. We did talk about that point, remember? The sun produces light. I said in order to understand the metaphor, you have to set aside your scientific understanding of the sun. So from a scientific standpoint, yes, the sun produces light. This is not a science class, in spite of the fact that I sometimes put in too many scientific references. This is a Vedanta class, so we're using the sun in a metaphoric sense, not in a scientific sense. As a metaphor, the sun is a metaphor for Atma. And let's just get this very clear. The sun illumines objects like, actually he's talking about it. The sun illumines objects like consciousness illumines activities in your mind. So far we're okay, but now we're going to get a little bit more detailed. Instead of saying the sun illumines objects, let's say the sun produces light that illumines objects. This is what Shankara, look how, again, slicing and dicing. This is Shankara uses logic in this very powerful way. The sun produces light that reveals objects. From the standpoint of science, that's perfectly fine. from the standpoint of Vedanta, we're in trouble. Because that would suggest that Atma produces consciousness that reveals the actions of your mind. And that's the problem. Atma doesn't produce consciousness. Shankara is going to explain this in the next several verses, so I won't go further with it right here. That is a problem. If Atma produces consciousness, then Atma has a job. Atma's doing something. And maybe Atma doesn't always do that job. Maybe Atma produces consciousness on Monday through Saturday, and on Sunday Atma takes a break. You get my point. This kind of interpretation of the metaphor leads to big problems. So this is what Shankara does here, is first he's showing the defect of the metaphor, and then in the following verses we're going to see how the application of the defective metaphor gets us in trouble. I hope I'm not... Sorry, this is a heavy section. I'll be as clear as I can. I think so far we're okay? I think so. Okay, let's finish this verse and then proceed. So if you were to say that the light, prakashaha, produced by the sun, arkakaryaha, if you think that, iti mityavachaha, that is a false statement according to Shankara. Not according to science, that's okay. Science can say the sun produces light, and science can describe in great detail how that happens, but we're talking about the sun in a metaphoric sense. In a metaphoric sense, Shankara points out, in our metaphoric usage, if you say the sun produces light, you've made a huge mistake. Iti mithya vachaha. This is a wrong concept, a wrong interpretation. And we'll see why as we continue. And the reason why is not with regard to the sun, but with regard to Atma. Atma cannot be said to produce consciousness. Why? That's what we see in the next verse. Yato bhutva bhavet yatcha, yato bhutva bhavet yatcha, tasya tat karyamishyate, tasya tat karyamishyate, sarupatvara bhutva bhutva prakasho jayate ravehe, prakasho jayate ravehe. I hope I didn't scare you off on this verse last week. It's actually simple logic. One of the things that makes it complicated is the way Sanskrit pronouns work. For our Sanskrit pronouns, yataha and yat in the first line actually refer to two different things. Similarly, tasya and tat refer to two different things. So it's very hard to parse the verse because of the ambiguity of the pronouns, which is why I gave you this verse that uses some of language of logic. So I'm going to set the Sanskrit aside for the first half. For the Sanskrit class, yataha, this is only for Sanskrit students. If you don't know Sanskrit, ignore what I'm going to say for the next 2 minutes. Have you ever had a teacher tell you to ignore? I'm telling you, if you don't know Sanskrit, ignore the following statement. Yataha bhavet, that from which something arises, abhutva yat. What arises? That which didn't exist before. Tasya, for that, karyam ishyate. That is considered the cause, tat, of that. Does that make any sense? It might, but it might not. Okay. So let's stay with the English here. If X didn't exist, basically it's a definition of cause and effect. What Shankara wants to establish here is Atma is not the cause and consciousness is not an effect. That's not complicated, right? There's no cause-effect relationship between Atma and consciousness. From the standpoint of science, there most certainly is a cause-effect relationship between sun and light. That's what science teaches us. But in our metaphoric usage of sun, set sun aside, Atma does not produce consciousness. Atma is not the cause of consciousness. Why? If X didn't exist before, if consciousness didn't exist before, and then it arises from Y. Consciousness arises from Atma. If consciousness, what do you mean by cause and effect? For something to be an effect, it has to arise. Correct? So think take the scientific understanding of the sun. And I'm going to bore you again. We're back to science. So the sun didn't always shine. There was a period of time when there was a huge cloud of hydrogen gas that was condensing, it was drawing in on itself due to gravity, and it became more and more dense. It still didn't shine. It didn't shine until it became so incredibly dense that it forced hydrogen atoms to fuse with each other. Took a long time for that to happen. Probably that cloud was condensing for billions of years before it achieved sufficient heat and density for this. By the way, this is a problem they're having in creating fusion energy. They've been trying, the joke about it in the world of science, for 50 years they've been trying to produce energy through nuclear fusion. And 50 years ago, it was 10 years away. Today, fusion energy is 10 years away. I'm just making the point that it's really difficult. So only after billions of years did that cloud of hydrogen gas condense sufficiently, then only did light emerge, not before. That which is a product didn't exist before. If you're making yogurt, did yogurt exist before the milk? Now some of you are saying, yeah, Swamiji, I get the culture from my friend. And that's not the metaphor. In your kitchen, you've got this dabba of milk. There's no yogurt. So yogurt arises. An effect arises from a cause. Is consciousness an effect that arises from Atma? So it's not that complex. You're all getting this fine. So and Shankara says that if something is non-existent and then it arises, then in a second line, then you can say that X is an effect of Y. If consciousness didn't previously exist, and then consciousness was somehow produced by Atma, then you could certainly say consciousness is a product or effect of Atma, but that's not the case. This is the, in logic, I think this is what they call reductio ad absurdum, where you use the opposing point of view and you show that the opposing point of view makes no sense. This is the kind of logic he's using here. Now, why is this so? Why does logic show that consciousness is not a product or effect of Atma? And the answer is given in the third line, sarupatvat. And what that means is because consciousness is the essential nature of Atma. Now that needs to be explained. Actually, in simple language is best. Atma doesn't produce consciousness because Atma is consciousness. That's it. It's that simple. Atma doesn't produce consciousness because Atma is consciousness. If you already have yogurt, yogurt doesn't produce that yogurt. It already is yogurt. So that's the idea here. There is no cause-effect relationship between Atma and consciousness because Atma is, by nature, Swarupa. Atma, the very nature of Atma is consciousness. That means with reference to the sun as a metaphor. To use the sun in a metaphoric sense, we would have to say that the sun doesn't produce light because the sun is light. That statement is not correct from the standpoint of science, but we're using it metaphorically. As a metaphor, the sun is light, and as a non-metaphor, Atma is consciousness. Shankara makes this point again. He says, abhutva na prakashaha jayate ravehe. Prakashaha ravehe, the light of the sun in the metaphoric sense, not science. Ravehe prakashaha, the light of the sun, na abhutva jayate. It is not the case that the light of the sun, abhutva, was previously non-existent and then jayate, and then emerged. Again, this is from pre-scientific times. And the challenge for us now is to look at this metaphor through the lens of Shankara's understanding. This is one of the challenges of studying what we're studying. Sometimes we take it for granted. What we're studying is 1,200 years old. What else have you studied that's 1,200 years old? If you pick up English, anything, I think Chaucer lived about 1,000 years ago. If you pick up Chaucer's English writings, you won't understand a single sentence because of its antiquity. The language won't make any sense to you. Things that are 1,000 or more years old cannot generally be understood in a very simple, straightforward way. We have to make extra effort. So here, my point is very clear, and that is to understand this metaphor of the sun, we have to see it through Shankara's eyes and not through the eyes of modern science. So from Shankara's standpoint, the sun doesn't produce light, the sun is light. To illustrate how Atma doesn't produce consciousness, Atma is consciousness. Okay, then. Good. Satta matre prakashasya, satta matre prakashasya, karta dityadirishyate, karta dityadirishyate, ghatari vyaktito yadvata, ghatari vyaktito yadvata, tadvad bodhatmanishyatam, tadvad bodhatmanishyatam. Start in the second line. Karta is agent. We're talking about the sun, so the sun being an agent of illumination. Agent means producer. That's our central topic right now. Shankara wants to make sure that you know Atma doesn't produce consciousness, so we're talking about the sun not producing light. The sun is not an agent of creation. And so that's the word karta here, agent. So karta, adityadihi. Aditya means sun. The sun, etc. Karta as an agent. So the sun being an agent of creating light, ishyate, the sun is considered to be an agent. And in my notes, I put the word agent in quotation marks because is considered. It's not really an agent in our context here. The sun is considered to be an agent of illumination. Illumining what? In the third line, gatari vyaktitaha, by illumining pots, etc. So the sun illumines pots. The sun creates. Let's choose our words correctly. The sun is an agent of illumination. Quotation marks around agent. The sun is considered to be an agent of illumination of pots, etc. Why? First line, prakashasya, for the light produced by the sun, satta matre, and this is the key of the verse, and it's has some references to Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. We won't get into it, but satta matra. Matra, you might guess, merely. It even sounds like merely, at least to me. Satta, existence. By its mere existence, the sun illumines pots. I'm going to just paraphrase now the first three lines here. The sun, and again, not from the scientific standpoint, from a metaphoric standpoint, the sun, by its mere existence, which means without doing anything, without producing anything, the sun, by its mere existence, illumines pots, etc. But the sun is considered to be a karta, an agent of illumination. Why is the sun considered an agent of illumination? This is tricky. Because of the pots. We'll try this. This is more of Shankara's skill of logic. This light illumines this pot. What about now? The sun stopped illumining? Light. I'm mixing metaphors. The light illumines the pot. If I hide the pot, I'll do it like this. Now, did the light stop illumining? The light continues to shine. But notice the shift of perspective. Right now, we can consider that light to be the agent of illumination. Now, the light ceased to be an agent of illumination. You get the point? This is Shankara's point. And that is to call light an agent of illumination has nothing to do with the light, has everything to do with something external. In the next week's class, we're back to upadhi. Upadhi, a conditioning factor which causes something to appear to be other than what it is. In the presence of a pot, this light seems to be an agent of illumination. In the absence of this pot, you cannot say that the light is an agent of illumination. So this idea of agency is not inherent in the light. Does that make sense? It comes and goes and depends on the pot. So inherently, or essentially, light is not an illuminer. Light is light. This is Shankara's point here. And he says, tadvat, in exactly this way, bodhatmani ishyatam. It is to be considered the same with regard to atma. And this is we use the technical terms drishtanta, metaphor, and darshtanta, that which is a metaphor, that which the metaphor represents. So drishtanta is light being an agent of illumination due to external considerations. Does that, my language is very terse because it's based on Sanskrit, but does that make sense? This light is an agent of illumination for a tangential reason. That's tangential reason means upadi in Sanskrit. So here, the light being an agent of illumination is not essential in the light. That which is essential doesn't come and go. The state of being an illuminator, an agent of illumination, comes and goes. So the status of being an agent of illumination does not belong, is not inherent in the light. And he says the same is true about consciousness. I recently got a question for this video question series, question answer series. And the question is, good question, I haven't answered it yet in the series. The question was, if Sakshi illumines the activities of my mind, doesn't that mean Sakshi is doing something? Isn't that an activity? It's a good question. And that's exactly what we're discussing right now. Conventionally, we understand Atma as Sakshi, a wareful witness. And from the questioner's perspective, consciousness is consciousness is the agent of the illumination of the objects in your mind. Can I say that the language is getting a little complicated here? Let me say that again. According to the questioner, Atma, consciousness, is, set Atma aside. Consciousness is the agent of the agent of illumination that reveals objects in the mind. Atma as Sakshi is an agent that illumines the objects in your mind. So this is the contention of the questioner, and I think you can get the connection to our topic right now. That is a defective perspective, because what happens when your mind is silent? Does consciousness cease to exist when there's nothing to be revealed? This is the error of calling Sakshi an agent of illumination. The English translation is actually helpful. Often English translations are not helpful. In this particular case, the English translation of Sakshi as witness is very helpful, because witness means uninvolved. A witness is that which is not involved in, I gave the example, a witness of a crime is neither the victim nor the perpetrator. The witness means someone who's not involved. And this English idea is helpful for us to understand the relationship between consciousness and thoughts. When we say consciousness is Sakshi, the awareful witness, which is observing the activities of the mind, excuse me, at the beginning, that's fine. Excuse me. When we begin our Vedantic inquiry, to use that language is perfectly fine. It's helpful. Can you imagine jumping into this level of analysis the first time you listen to Vedanta? If that were there would be no second time for you. You would run away. I would run away. So what we're engaged in right now is a very deep, profound, and certainly not introductory level discussion. So at the beginning, it makes sense. Start easy. And at the beginning, we say, Sakshi, the awareful witness, reveals the activities of your mind, is absolutely fine at the beginning, but now Shankara is pointing out, on analysis, there's several problems with that. And the problem is one of agency. We're going to see that problem of agency in the next verse, but let me just finish with one point. Come back to that word satta matra. By its mere presence. The metaphor that's often used in Vedanta, in fact, Shankara himself is going to use it in a couple more verses. The metaphor that's often used is that of a magnet. You put a magnet next to a piece of metal, and the magnet draws that piece of metal. What did the magnet do to draw that piece of metal? Nothing. The magnet was just there. In fact, even science would say the magnet was just there and the electromagnetic field it created was just there. It didn't do anything. That metal was in its sphere of influence and therefore was drawn to the metal. Sphere of influence, satta matra. That's really the idea here. When thoughts, mental activities, vrittis in your mind, due to the mere proximity to consciousness, they gain knownness. Thoughts gain knownness. Knownness is a property of the thoughts due to the mere presence of consciousness. The commentator says, sannidhi matrena, very common expression, due to something's mere presence. Like iron in the presence of the magnet is drawn, the magnet doesn't suck it in. The magnet's mere presence is sufficient. In the same, let's go back to the sun. In the mere presence of the sun, objects are illumined. The sun is not working, again, set aside science, the sun is not producing light. The sun is light from our metaphoric sense. And finally, atma is not producing consciousness to reveal the activities of your mind. Rather, activities of your mind are in the mere presence of Atma. Atma is consciousness, and merely being in the presence is all it takes. Now, you might wonder, why is this absolutely is, I won't call it by the way, hair-splitting logic. This is not hair-splitting logic. I mean, this is fairly big stuff. This is like wood-splitting logic, which means it's not that fine. Wait till you not wait till you see. Don't see. Don't. If you get into this hair-splitting logic again, you'll run away. It's not helpful. I guess the point I'm trying to make here now is this is not hair-splitting logic. It's logic, and it's a little bit complex. I won't deny that. But we're not splitting hairs. Pretty important to distinguish that. Look at the difference between consciousness produces, Atma produces consciousness that makes the objects in your mind known, versus objects in your mind are known by being in the mere presence of consciousness. Is that hair splitting? No way. Again, if this were your first introduction to Vedanta, it would seem like hair splitting. But from our perspective now, it's pretty substantive. It's really important. Okay. Now, why is it so important? You can understand the logical reason it's so important. How about in an experiential reason? How does this very correct understanding of the nature of Atma and consciousness, how does this help us become free from suffering? Since that's our goal, right? Our goal is not to master this philosophical understanding of the nature of consciousness. Of course, it's helpful to do that first, but our goal is to use these teachings to become free from suffering. And we see that connection in this next verse, which will conclude our class today. Yeah. Okay. This is a nice, I've seen this example elsewhere. Nice example. Bilat sarpasya niryane, bilat sarpasya niryane, suryo yadvat prakashakaha, suryo yadvat prakashakaha, prayatne navinayad tadvata, prayatnena vinatadvata jnana jnatatma bodharupataha jnatatma bodharupataha. Wonderful metaphor. Sarpasya niryane. Niryane. Sarpasya niryane. When a snake leaves its hole. So especially in the Indian countryside, you see these snake mountains. In this country, I think there's so much vegetation, you don't really see the snake coming out of a hole. So we have to imagine you're in a dry place and you see a snake emerging from a hole in the ground. Sarpasya niryane bilat. Bila is its mound, that snake mound. So when the snake leaves its hole, leaves its mound, then what? Suryaha prakashakaha. Then it is illumined by the sun. The sun illumines, makes that snake known to you, prayatnena vina, without any effort. It's interesting. The snake makes the effort to come out of the hole. What effort does the sun make to illumine the snake? No effort whatsoever. Satta matrena, in a mere... Because the snake leaves its hole in the presence of the sun, therefore it is revealed without effort. The snake makes the effort, but the knownness of that snake doesn't require any effort. And it says, tadvat, in the same way, jnatatma. The same is true to atma, being the knower. Bodharupataha. Excuse me. Due to its nature as consciousness. Now, let's make this very, very clear. The commentator makes it very clear, and that is to be an agent. The commentator says to be an agent is a vichara, is a change of state. If the sun, go back to the scientific understanding, which is not our understanding. The sun at one point becomes the creator of light, but not initially. I said only when those hydrogen atoms are squished into each other till they fuse. Only then does light emerge from the sun. Previously, the sun was in a state in which it was not an agent of light, agent of shining. It was just dense, hot hydrogen gas. Then the sun becomes an agent that produces light. The point I'm making is the sun goes through a change of state from a state of non-fusion to a state of fusion. And here's the problem. Does Atma undergo changes of state? Again, this is really important. Right now, your consciousness has a role. It is an agent of thinking. You're trying to understand what in the world is Swamiji talking about today. This is such a heavy topic. Some of you may think. I think most of you are getting this quite well. But suppose somebody is thinking like that. What is going on here? What does Shankara mean? What does Swamiji mean? Thinking. And at that point, you identify yourself as thinker. I don't understand, or hopefully, I understand. This is complicated stuff, but I'm getting it. I understand. When you say I understand, who is that I really? Consciousness. Consciousness is somebody who can hear and understand and think? No. So this is our problem of identification, right? Right now, there's the role of being a student, the role of thinking, the role of trying to understand, and you say, I understand. You have identified yourself with the agent of understanding. Agent of understanding is your mind, not you. Or, how about, I made some notes. Right now you see me. If you say, I see Swamiji, you have identified yourself as the agent of seeing. You don't see me. You, as consciousness, are the one that makes the image of me in your mind known. Let me say that again. That sounded good to me. I don't know if it sounds... I have no idea if it sounds good to you. It sounded good to me. So let me repeat that. You do not see me. You are the consciousness in whose presence the image of me in your mind becomes known. In fact, I like that a lot. Third time, last time. You don't see me. You are the consciousness in whose presence the image of me in your mind becomes known. And the reason this is crucial is it helps you disidentify with all these roles. Seeing is a role. You are agent of seeing, agent of hearing, agent of thinking, agent of doing, agent of walking, agent of talking. This is how we get identified thoroughly with our worldly activities. To understand that Atma is not an agent, on the surface seems incredibly abstract. But look at the benefit you can get if this really goes in. And that is, Atma is not a changing agent. This is, by the way, this is what Shankara has just said in this series of verses. The sun is not an agent of illumination, producing the light by which the snake is seen. The snake makes the effort to come out of its hill. The sun makes no effort at all. I've just paraphrased this last verse. The application of this is that consciousness, the consciousness present in your experience right now, not only does it do nothing at all, but it is not an agent that allows you to see me. It is not an agent that allows you to hear me. It is not an agent which allows you to think. And you have to admit, that's a conventional way of thinking. Atma does all this stuff. Atma is behind thinking. Atma is behind seeing. Atma is behind hearing. No. And Shankara makes it very clear. Consciousness doesn't do anything. We'll conclude with this point. How many times have we said consciousness is unchanging? You've heard that and you've understood that very well. Unchanging means consciousness doesn't switch from being thinker to being seer, to being hearer, to being feeler of emotions, to being the doer of actions. Atma doesn't change. Atma doesn't do anything. This is a correct understanding of Sakshi. Uninvolved. Consciousness that's present right now in this experience is not involved in the experience, but rather this experience takes place in the presence of consciousness, in the presence of unchanging consciousness. This complicated experience takes place, and in this experience we have plenty of opportunities for mistakes. To say, I hear what Swamiji is saying. I see Swamiji sitting in the chair. I'm thinking about what Sri Shankaracharya is teaching here. You, as consciousness, are doing none of those things. I said 3 times. This is 4th. And absolutely, this is the last time. Last time, you do not see me. You do not hear me. You are the unchanging consciousness in whose presence the image of my body and the sound of my voice that arises in your mind, those mental events become known in the presence of consciousness. So this is, I think, extremely profound, and when you really get it, it's transformative. It gives you this, the term you've heard me use before, healthy distance. You gain some kind of disidentification from your body, mind, and world around you, a kind of healthy disassociation that gives you freedom from suffering. Okay, this is very nice. A good place to conclude our class today. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschad Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.